The Ranger Took Our Blood. Before we start, I need a favor. Let me know in the comments what's been done right or wrong. This also helps me create better content for you all. And check out our Creepy Tales playlist. The videos with the most views, likes, and comments will form the channel. Also, subscribe and share. And now we begin. Chapter 1. Welcome to Pine Ridge. The gravel crunched under our tires as we pulled into Pine Ridge State Park's main entrance. 10 of us crammed into 2 SUVs, college seniors on our last spring break together before graduation scattered us across the country. The wooden sign promising nature's sanctuary felt welcoming in the afternoon sun, but something about the dense tree line beyond made me shiver. Everyone remembered to register at the ranger station, called out Marcus, our self-appointed trip leader, as we unloaded our gear. The others were already joking and planning our 3-day camping adventure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The ranger station sat at the forest's edge, a small log building that seemed to absorb the surrounding shadows. When we pushed through the heavy wooden door, a bell announced our arrival with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. "Welcome to Pine Ridge." The voice came from behind the counter, smooth and oddly formal. The ranger who emerged was tall and pale, with dark hair slicked back and eyes that seemed almost colorless in the dim light. His uniform was immaculate, pressed and pristine despite the remote location. "I'm Ranger Holloway," he said, extending a hand that felt ice cold despite the warm day. "I'll need everyone to sign in. Park regulations, you understand." As we filled out the registration forms, I noticed his fingers were unusually long, almost elegant. He watched each of us with an intensity that made my skin crawl, as if he were memorizing our faces. "The campground's about 2 miles in," he said, pointing to a trail map on the wall. "Stay on the marked paths. The woods can be dangerous for those who wander." Sarah, ever the skeptic, rolled her eyes. "What's the worst that could happen? Bears?" Ranger Holloway's smile was thin and didn't reach his eyes. "Among other things." We shouldered our packs and headed for the trail, but I glanced back to see him still watching us through the station window. Something about his stillness bothered Mayhay stood perfectly motionless, like a statue waiting. The trail wound through towering pines that blocked most of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight even in midday. Our voices seemed muffled by the thick canopy, and I noticed there were no bird songs, no insect buzzes, just the sound of our footsteps on the packed earth. "This place gives me the creeps," whispered Jenny, falling into step beside me. I nodded, but didn't want to seem paranoid in front of the others. They were all laughing and chatting, excited about the adventure ahead. Only Jenny and I seemed to notice the unnatural quiet, the way the trees seemed to lean in toward the path, creating a tunnel of green shadows. When we reached the campground, it was smaller than expected, just a clearing with a fire pit and a few picnic tables. The surrounding forest pressed close on all sides, making the space feel claustrophobic. "Cozy," muttered Dave, dropping his pack with a thud. As we set up our tents, I kept expecting to see other campers, but we were completely alone. The isolation should have been peaceful, but instead it felt like we were trespassing somewhere we didn't belong. That evening, as we sat around the campfire sharing stories and roasting marshmallows, I noticed movement in the tree line, just shadows shifting between the trunks, but too deliberate to be wind. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, pointing toward the forest. Everyone turned to look, but the woods were still. "See what?" Marcus asked. "I thought I saw someone out there." Tom laughed. Probably just Ranger Creepy making his rounds. The nickname stuck, and we all chuckled, but the laughter felt forced. Deep down, I think we all sensed something was wrong with Ranger Holloway. The way he'd watched us, the cold touch of his hand, that unnatural stillness. As the fire died down and we prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed. Somewhere in the darkness beyond our small circle of light, I was certain someone was watching, waiting. Chapter 2. Night Visits. I woke to the sound of footsteps circling our campsite. My tent was positioned at the edge of our small cluster, and through the thin fabric I could see a shadow moving slowly around the perimeter. The footsteps were deliberate, measured, like someone conducting an inspection. My heart hammered as I unzipped my sleeping bag as quietly as possible. The luminous hands of my watch showed 2:30 in the morning. Everyone else seemed to be sleeping peacefully, their breathing steady and deep. The shadow paused outside my tent. I held my breath, watching the silhouette through the orange nylon. The figure was tall and thin, definitely human-shaped, but somehow wrong in its proportions. It stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, and I had the horrible sensation that it was looking directly at me through the fabric. Then it moved on, continuing its circuit of our campsite. I waited until the footsteps faded before unzipping my tent flap just enough to peer out. The campsite was empty, bathed in pale moonlight filtering through the canopy. The dying embers of our fire cast weak red light across the clearing. But there, at the edge of the firelight, I saw fresh boot prints in the soft earth, large, deep impressions that led in a perfect circle around all our tents. In the morning, I tried to tell the others about the midnight visitor. "You were probably just dreaming," said Kate, brushing off my concerns. "New place, weird sounds. You know how it is." But Jenny backed me up. I heard it too. Something was definitely out there. Marcus examined the boot prints I'd found, frowning. "These could be from yesterday when we set up camp." "They're too fresh," I insisted. "And look at the pattern, they go all the way around our tents." "Maybe it was Ranger Holloway checking on us," suggested Lisa. "That's probably part of his job." The thought of him watching us sleep was even more disturbing than an unknown intruder, but I didn't say that. Instead, I helped break camp, eager to spend the day away from the oppressive feeling of the forest. We decided to hike to the waterfall marked on the trail map, a 2-hour trek through increasingly dense woodland. The path was well maintained but narrow, forcing us to walk single file through sections where the trees grew so close together their branches formed a tunnel overhead. About an hour into the hike, we encountered Ranger Holloway. He appeared suddenly on the trail ahead of us, as if he'd materialized from the shadows between the trees. In daylight, his pallor was even more pronounced, his skin almost translucent. Dark circles ringed his eyes, making them appear sunken. "How was your first night?" he asked, that same thin smile playing at his lips. "Sleep well?" The question felt loaded, as if he already knew the answer. I studied his face for any sign that he'd been our midnight visitor, but his expression gave nothing away. "Fine," Marcus replied, though his voice was tight. "Thanks for checking." "Oh, I always keep an eye on my campers," Ranger Holloway said. "Pine Ridge can be unpredictable, especially at night." He stepped aside to let us pass, but as I walked by him, I caught a scent that made my stomach turn. It was metallic and sharp, like old pennies left in the rain, the smell of blood. Sarah was behind me, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. She'd smelled it too. "Ranger Holloway," she said, stopping. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." His smile widened, showing teeth that seemed too sharp, too white. "Just tired. Night shifts, you understand. I'll let you get back to your hike." He melted back into the forest as quickly as he'd appeared, leaving us standing on the trail feeling unsettled. "Did anyone else think he looked sick?" asked Tom once we were sure he was gone. "More than sick," Sarah muttered. "He looked dead." We continued toward the waterfall, but the encounter had dampened our spirits. The forest felt heavier now, more oppressive. Every shadow seemed to hide a watching figure. Every rustle in the undergrowth made us jump. When we finally reached the waterfall, it was beautiful but somehow wrong. The water fell from a height of about 30 feet into a deep, dark pool. But the sound it made was oft too muffled, too quiet for the volume of water cascading down. "The acoustics are weird here," observed Jenny, standing at the pool's edge. I looked around the clearing and noticed something that made my blood run cold. Scattered around the base of the waterfall were clothes. Not old enough to be litter, but faded as if they'd been there for months. A hiking boot here, a torn shirt there, a backpack wedged between two rocks. "Guys," I called out, pointing to the debris. "Look at this." We spent the next few minutes collecting the scattered items. There was enough gear for at least 3 people, maybe more. All of it showed signs of violent tears, stains that looked suspiciously like dried blood. "We should report this to the ranger," said Marcus, but his voice lacked conviction. "To Ranger Holloway?" Sarah shook her head. "Something's not right about him. Haven't you noticed? He's always exactly where we are, like he's following us. Or hurting us," I added quietly. The walk back to camp was tense and silent. We all kept looking over our shoulders, expecting to see that pale figure watching us from the shadows. The forest felt hostile now, as if it were working against us. That evening, we ate dinner quickly and built up the fire higher than necessary. Nobody wanted to acknowledge what we were all thinking, that we weren't alone in these woods, and whatever was out there wasn't friendly. As darkness fell, I found myself staring into the tree line, waiting for those measured footsteps to begin their nightly circuit, because I was certain they would come again. And this time, I didn't think the Watcher would be content to just observe. Chapter 3. The First Disappearance. Dave never came back from his bathroom trip. He'd gotten up around midnight, grumbling about too much coffee by the fire, and walked toward the edge of the campsite where we designated as the facilities area. That was the last time any of us saw him. When he didn't return after 20 minutes, Marcus went looking for him. "Dave," Marcus called into the darkness, his flashlight beam sweeping between the trees. "Dave, you okay out there?" Nothing. We all joined the search, fanning out in different directions with our flashlights cutting weak cones through the oppressive darkness. The silence was absolute tenno night sounds, no insects, just our own breathing and the crunch of leaves under our feet. "Dave," Jenny shouted, "this isn't funny." But we all knew it wasn't a joke. Dave wasn't the type to wander off or try to scare us. He was practical, responsible, the kind of person who always brought extra batteries and first aid supplies. Tom found his flashlight first, lying on the ground about 50 yards from camp. The beam was still on, cutting a bright circle in the fallen leaves, but there was no sign of Dave. "His flashlight just fell?" Sarah picked it up, examining it. "The strap's not broken." I crouched down to examine the ground around where we'd found it. The earth was soft here, and I could make out footprints in the dirt. Dave's hiking boots, clear as day, showed he'd been walking normally, and then they just stopped. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the prints. He was walking, and then nothing. "What do you mean, nothing?" Marcus aimed his light at the ground. The footprints simply ended, not like he'd stepped onto harder ground or rocks. They just stopped existing, as if Dave had been lifted straight into the air. Lisa was shaking. "People don't just vanish. There has to be an explanation." "We need to get help," Kate said. "Call the police, search and rescue, something." Marcus checked his phone. No signal. We're too deep in the forest. "The ranger station," I suggested, though the thought of facing Ranger Holloway in the dark made my skin crawl. "We can use their radio." "It's 2 miles back through the woods. Tom pointed out. In the dark. What if whatever got Dave is still out there? We stood in a circle, flashlight beams crossing and recrossing, all of us thinking the same thing but afraid to say it out loud. Dave hadn't just wandered off or gotten lost. Something had taken him. We stick together, Marcus decided. Pack up camp, hike back to the station. Nobody goes anywhere alone. It took us an hour to break camp in the darkness, stuffing our gear haphazardly into packs and bags. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made us freeze and listen. I kept expecting to hear Dave calling for help, or worse, screaming. The hike back was a nightmare. The trail that had seemed welcoming in daylight was now a tunnel of darkness, our flashlight beams barely penetrating the wall of black trees. We walked in a tight group, constantly checking to make sure everyone was still there. Halfway back, Jenny grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" We all stopped, listening. At first there was only silence, but then I heard it too, a sound like someone walking parallel to us through the trees. Footsteps that matched our pace, stopping when we stopped, starting when we started. "Someone's following us," whispered Sarah. Marcus aimed his flashlight toward the sound, but the beam showed only tree trunks and shadows. "Who's there?" he called out. "Dave, is that you?" The footsteps stopped. We waited, hearts pounding, but the forest remained silent. After a few minutes, we continued walking, but the sensation of being followed never left us. When we finally reached the ranger station, it was dark except for a single light in the window. The parking lot was empty. Our SUVs sat exactly where we'd left them, but they looked different somehow, more isolated and vulnerable. Marcus pounded on the station door. "Hello, Ranger Holloway? We need help." No answer. Tom tried the door handle. It was unlocked, creaking open to reveal the empty front room. The same maps and pamphlets were scattered across the counter, but there was no sign of the ranger. "Hello," Lisa called into the back rooms. "Is anyone here?" We searched the entire station, the office, the storage room, even a small apartment in the back that was apparently Ranger Holloway's living quarters. Everything was neat and tidy, but completely empty. "Where is he?" Sarah demanded. "There has to be someone here. This is a state park, right? There have to be other employees." I was examining the logbook on the counter, running my finger down the list of recent visitors. Our names were there from yesterday, but what I saw above them made my blood freeze. "Guys," I said quietly, "look at this." The previous entries in the logbook were dated weeks ago. Groups of hikers, families, couples all signed in for camping trips in Pine Ridge. But next to each group of names was a red stamp that read, "Missing." 12 different groups over the past 2 months, 47 people total, all marked as missing. "This can't be right," Marcus said, leaning over my shoulder to read the entries. 47 people don't just disappear from a state park. But even as he said it, we all knew it was true. The clothes at the waterfall, the unnatural silence in the forest, Ranger Holloway's strange behavior, it all made horrible sense. "We need to leave," Jenny said. "Right now. Get in the cars and drive away from here." I was already moving toward the door when I heard that familiar sound of measured footsteps circling the building, slow, deliberate, like a predator pacing around its trapped prey. Through the window, I saw a tall shadow moving past the glass. "He's here," I whispered. The footsteps stopped directly outside the front door. Chapter 4, Trapped. The door handle turned slowly. We all backed away from the entrance, clustering together in the center of the ranger station. Our flashlights created a small pool of light in the darkness, but the shadows seemed to press in from all sides. Ranger Holloway stepped through the doorway, but something was wrong with him. His pale skin seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, and his eyes reflected our flashlight beams like an animal's. When he smiled, I could see that his teeth were definitely too sharp, too pointed. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice carrying that same formal tone, but underneath it was something else hunger. "We're looking for our friend," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Dave, he disappeared from our campsite tonight." "Disappeared?" Ranger Holloway tilted his head, the movement unnaturally fluid. "How unfortunate. The woods can be dangerous at night, so many things that hunt in the darkness." "We need to call for help," Sarah said. "Search and rescue, the police." "No signal out here," the ranger interrupted. "No cell towers for miles. Very isolated, very private." He moved further into the station, and I noticed he cast no shadow despite the bright flashlight beams pointing at him. The wrongness of it made my vision blur, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. "The radio," I said. "You must have a radio to contact the outside." His smile widened. "I'm afraid the radio is out of order." Tom edged toward the back rooms. "I'll check the equipment." "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Ranger Holloway said without looking at him. "You might not like what you find." But Tom was already pushing through the door to the back office. A moment later, we heard him gasp, then the sound of retching. "Tom," Jenny called out, "what is it?" He stumbled back into the main room, his face pale and sick. "Don't go back there," he whispered. "Jesus Christ, don't go back there." Ranger Holloway's expression didn't change. "I told you not to look." "What's back there?" Marcus demanded. "Dave," Tom managed. "What's left of him?" The words hit us like a physical blow. Sarah started crying, and Lisa backed toward the door. But Ranger Holloway moved with impossible speed, sliding between us and the exit. "Leaving so soon?" he asked. "But you just got here, and I'm so very hungry." In the harsh flashlight beams, I could see that his skin wasn't just pale, was translucent. Dark veins showed beneath the surface, and his fingernails had grown into claws. Whatever was wearing Ranger Holloway's uniform, it wasn't human. "What are you?" I whispered. "Hungry," he replied. "It's been weeks since the last group. I was beginning to think I'd have to range further from my territory." He moved closer, and I caught that metallic scent again, blood, but underneath it something else, something rotten and ancient. 47 people, Marcus said, backing away. "The logbook. You killed them all." "Killed?" The thing that looked like Ranger Holloway seemed genuinely puzzled. "I don't kill them. I transform them. They become something better, something eternal, like me." "You're a vampire," Sarah said, the word coming out as barely a whisper. "Such a crude term. I prefer to think of myself as an evolutionary advancement, humanity's next step, and you're going to help me take it." Kate had been inching toward the window while he talked. Now she made a break for it, trying to climb out onto the ledge. But those impossible claws caught her before she made it halfway through. The scream she made wasn't entirely human. When it was over, Kate lay motionless on the floor, her neck bearing 2 neat puncture wounds. But her chest was still rising and falling, and her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling with an expression of dreamy contentment. "Sleep now," the creature whispered to her. "When you wake, you'll understand." The rest of us pressed together in terror, but there was nowhere to run. The thing had positioned itself between us and both exits, and it moved faster than anything human could. "Who's next?" it asked, those pale eyes scanning our group. "I do so enjoy variety." Tom stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "Take me. Let the others go." "Noble," the creature mused, "but pointless. I need you all. A new colony requires a certain minimum population to be viable." "Colony?" Jenny's voice was barely audible. Pine Ridge will be perfect, isolated, protected. The authorities think all those missing hikers simply got lost in the wilderness. They've stopped looking for them. And when my numbers grow large enough, we'll spread to other parks, other forests. It moved toward Tom with predatory grace, but Sarah suddenly grabbed one of the heavy flashlights and hurled it at the creature's head. The light struck true, sending the thing staggering backward. "Run!" she screamed. We scattered in different directions. Some headed for the front door, others toward the back rooms. I found myself diving through the window Kate had tried to escape through, glass cutting my arms as I tumbled onto the ground outside. Behind me, I could hear screaming and the sound of something inhuman snarling, but I didn't look back. I ran toward our SUVs, fumbling for the keys Marcus had given me earlier. The engine turned over on the second try, and I gunned it toward the station. Through the windows, I could see flashlight beams moving erratically inside, and shadows that moved wrong, too fast and fluid to be human. Then Jenny burst through the front door, blood streaming from her neck but still running. I hit the brakes and she dove into the passenger seat. "Go," she screamed. "Go, go, go." I floored the accelerator, tires spinning in the gravel as we raced away from the ranger station. In the rearview mirror, I saw the pale figure of Ranger Holloway standing in the doorway, watching us leave with that terrible smile. But I also saw something else that made my heart sink. Two more figures emerged from the station behind him, moving with the same unnatural grace. Kate and Tom, their eyes reflecting the red glow of my taillights. Chapter 5. The Chase. Jenny pressed a torn piece of her shirt against the puncture wounds on her neck as I drove. Blood seeped through the fabric, but she was alive and conscious. "We have to get help," she said, her voice weak but determined. "Police, FBI, someone who'll believe us." "Will anyone believe us?" I asked, taking the curves of the mountain road too fast. "Vampires in a state park? It sounds insane." "The evidence is back there. The bodies, the logbook, all those missing people." Her words were cut off by a sound that made my blood freeze. A howl echoed through the forest, long and mournful and definitely not human. It was answered by another, then another, until the night was filled with an inhuman chorus. "They're hunting us," Jenny whispered. I pressed harder on the accelerator, but the old mountain road was treacherous in the dark. Sharp curves and steep drop-offs forced me to slow down despite the growing sounds of pursuit behind us. In the rear-view mirror, I caught glimpses of pale figures moving through the trees alongside the road. They kept pace with our vehicle effortlessly, bounding from tree to tree with impossible agility. "How many are there?" I asked. "I don't know. When we scattered in the station, I saw it grab Tom first. He didn't even have time to scream. Then Kate got up from the floor, but she wasn't Kate anymore. Her eyes were different, hungry. Another howl, closer this time. The headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road ahead Tom, still wearing his hiking clothes, but moving with that same fluid grace as the creature that had been Ranger Holloway. I swerved around him, tires squealing as we barely missed the guardrail. In the side mirror, I watched him leap impossibly high, landing on the roof of the SUV with a metallic thud. Claws scraped against the metal above our heads as he tried to tear through to get at us. "The sunroof!" Jenny screamed. I could see the latches starting to give way under his assault. With no other choice, I yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, then snapped it back left. The violent motion sent Tom tumbling off the roof and into the trees. But more figures were emerging from the forest. I counted at least 6 of them now, all moving with that same predatory grace. Some I recognized Kate's blonde hair, Marcus's red jacket, Sarah's distinctive hiking boots. They'd all been turned into something else. The main road can't be much further, I said, more to reassure myself than Jenny. Once we get to the highway, we can find help. Look, Jenny pointed ahead. Lights. The glow of civilization appeared around the next Bend Street lights, neon signs, the blessed sight of other vehicles. The little mountain town of Cedar Falls sat at the base of the park, home to maybe 3,000 people but looking like a metropolis after the horror of the forest. I pulled into the parking lot of the first building I saw, a 24-hour diner called May's Place. Through the windows, I could see people inside, normal people eating late dinners and drinking coffee. The mundane sight almost made me cry with relief. Stay close, I told Jenny as we got out of the SUV. Don't let anyone get near your neck until we know they're human. The diner's bell chimed as we entered, and several customers looked up at us curiously. We must have been quite a sight-torn clothes. Blood, wild eyes, moving like cornered animals. Help us, I said to the waitress behind the counter. Please, we need to call the police. She was an older woman with graying hair and kind eyes. Honey, what happened to you two? You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, Jenny said. Something in the park. It killed our friends. The waitress, her name tag read Dolores, came around the counter with a first aid kit. Let me look at that neck wound, sweetie, then we'll call Sheriff Morrison. As she cleaned Jenny's wound, I tried to explain what had happened at Pine Ridge. The other customers gathered around to listen, their faces showing a mixture of concern and skepticism. Ranger Holloway, you said? Asked a man in a trucker's cap. Tall fellow, real pale, been working up there about 2 months now. You know him? I asked. Hell, everybody knows him. Keeps to himself mostly, but he comes into town for supplies. Always shops at night, never during the day. Real polite, but something about him always seemed off. Off? How? The trucker scratched his beard. Well, for one thing, there wasn't supposed to be a new ranger. Old Pete Morrison Thay, sheriff's brother. He'd been the ranger at Pine Ridge for 20 years. Then one day, this Holloway fellow shows up saying Pete was transferred. Where was Pete transferred to? Nobody knows. He just disappeared, left all his stuff behind, never said goodbye to anyone, not like Pete at all. A chill ran down my spine. When did this happen? About 2 months ago, right around the time people started going missing in the park. Dolores finished bandaging Jenny's neck and stepped back. I've called Sheriff Morrison. He'll be here in a few minutes. You two need to eat something. Get your strength back. She brought us coffee and sandwiches, but I could barely eat. Through the diner's windows, I kept watching the street, expecting to see pale figures moving in the shadows. The parking lot remained empty except for our SUV and a few other vehicles, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. The missing people, I said to the trucker. How many have there been? Dozens. Mostly hikers and campers. People who went up to the park for a few days and never came back. Search and rescue's been called out so many times they've started charging the state extra. And nobody's connected it to Ranger Holloway? How could they? He's the one who reports them missing. Always says he saw them leave the park, heading down the mountain. By the time their families get worried and call the police, the trail's cold. The bell chimed again, and Sheriff Morrison entered. He was a big man with a weathered face and skeptical eyes, the kind of law enforcement officer who'd seen enough human stupidity to doubt any story involving the supernatural. Dolores says you folks had some trouble up at Pine Ridge, he said, settling his bulk into the booth across from us. I told him everything, the midnight visitor, the disappearance of Dave, the creature at the ranger station, watching our friends get turned into something inhuman. Sheriff Morrison listened without interruption, his expression growing more skeptical by the minute. Vampires, he said when I finished. You're telling me there are vampires in Pine Ridge State Park? I know how it sounds, but it sounds like you've been through a traumatic experience and your imagination's running wild. People don't turn into vampires, son. This is real life, not some horror movie. And explain the logbook, Jenny said. 47 people marked as missing. Explain the clothes we found at the waterfall. Explain what happened to your brother Pete. Sheriff Morrison's expression darkened. What do you know about Pete? He was the ranger before Holloway. He disappeared 2 months ago, didn't he? Right around the time people started going missing. Pete's disappearance is an ongoing investigation. I can't discuss the details with civilians. But I could see doubt creeping into his eyes. The coincidences were too many to ignore, even for a skeptical small-town sheriff. Look, I said, I don't care if you believe us about the vampire thing, but something's wrong up there, something dangerous. You need to get a team together and search that ranger station. Sheriff Morrison was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the dark forest beyond the town. Finally, he nodded. I'll call the state police, get a search team together for First Light. If there's evidence of foul play, we'll find it. First Light might be too late, I said. How many people are camping up there right now? It's Wednesday night in October. Probably not many, but he pulled out his radio. Dispatch, this is Sheriff Morrison. I need you to contact Pine Ridge State Park and advise them to close the campgrounds immediately. Possible safety hazard. The radio crackled. Copy that, Sheriff. Should I try to reach Ranger Holloway? Sheriff Morrison and I exchanged glances. Negative, he said. Send a patrol car up there instead, and tell them to be careful. As the sheriff made his calls, I watched the darkness beyond the diner's windows. Somewhere out there, the thing that had been Ranger Holloway was building his colony, turning innocent campers into predators like himself. But at least we'd escaped. At least we were safe now. That's what I told myself, anyway. I should have paid more attention to Jenny's reflection in the window. Chapter 6. False Dawn. The patrol car never made it to Pine Ridge. Sheriff Morrison got the call around 4 in the morning. Officers Bradley and Santos had been found by a passing motorist. Their cruiser overturned in a ditch about halfway up the mountain road. Both men were alive, but unconscious, with no memory of what had happened. Each had 2 neat puncture wounds on their necks. Bring them to the hospital, Sheriff Morrison ordered over the radio. And I want that area cordoned off. Nobody else goes up that mountain until we know what we're dealing with. Jenny and I had been dozing fitfully in the diner's back booth when the call came in. The news hit us like ice water. The creatures had left the park, were actively hunting anyone who tried to approach their territory. We need to get out of Cedar Falls, I told Sheriff Morrison, if they're coming down the mountain. Nobody's going anywhere, he said firmly. This is still my jurisdiction, and I'm not about to let whatever's up there spread to other towns. He'd set up a command post in the diner, using May's landline to coordinate with state police and the CDC. The story was spreading fast, mysterious attacks, possible disease outbreak, quarantine procedures being implemented. Disease outbreak? I asked. It's easier to sell than vampires, Sheriff Morrison replied. Gets us the resources we need without sounding like lunatics. By dawn, Cedar Falls was swarming with emergency vehicles, state police, hazmat teams, CDC investigators, even a few military vehicles that nobody would explain. Roadblocks were set up at both ends of town, and residents were advised to stay indoors. But I noticed something troubling as I watched the activity from the diner window. Several of the emergency personnel moved with that same fluid grace I'd seen in the creatures. Their skin was pale, their eyes too bright, and they cast no reflection in the diner's windows. Sheriff, I said quietly, I think some of your reinforcements aren't what they seem. He followed my gaze to a group of CDC officials who were setting up equipment in the parking lot. At first glance, they looked normal hazmat suits, official badges, professional demeanor. But when one of them turned toward the window, I saw his eyes reflect the morning light like mirrors. "Son of a bitch," Sheriff Morrison muttered. "How many of them are there?" "I don't know, but they're not just hiding in the forest anymore. They're organized, infiltrating official channels." The sheriff pulled out his radio, but before he could speak, one of the fake CDC officials appeared at the diner's door. He was tall and pale, with the same predatory smile we'd seen on Ranger Holloway. "Sheriff Morrison," the creature said as it entered. "I'm Dr. Vance from the CDC. We need to discuss the quarantine protocols." Sheriff Morrison's hand moved slowly toward his weapon, but the creature's pale eyes tracked the movement. "I wouldn't," it said softly. "There are so many of us now." Through the window, I could see more of them. Fake emergency personnel, fake state police officers, fake hazmat workers. They'd replaced or turned dozens of people in just a few hours. "What do you want?" Sheriff Morrison asked. "Cooperation," Dr. Vance replied. "Your town is perfect for our needs. Isolated, manageable population, good access to hiking trails and campgrounds. We can expand our colony here much more efficiently than in the forest." Jenny gripped my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. "They're taking over the whole town." "Not taking over," the creature corrected. "Improving. Evolution is a natural process, Sheriff. We're simply accelerating it." Dolores had been listening from behind the counter, her face pale with terror. "What happened to the real CDC people? The real state police?" "They're safe," Dr. Vance said with that horrible smile. "They're becoming something better. Just like you will." "Like hell," Sheriff Morrison said, drawing his gun. The creature moved faster than human reflexes could follow, but the sheriff was ready for it. His shot took Dr. Vance in the chest, sending the thing staggering backward. But instead of falling, it looked down at the bullet hole with mild interest. "Silver bullets would be more effective," it said. "But then, you probably don't believe in old superstitions." More creatures were converging on the diner now, all wearing official uniforms, all moving with that same predatory grace. We were surrounded. "Back exit," Dolores whispered, "through the kitchen." We followed her through the swinging doors into the diner's kitchen, but even there we weren't safe. A creature wearing a state trooper's uniform was already waiting for us, standing perfectly still beside the walk-in freezer. "Going somewhere?" it asked. Sheriff Morrison fired again, but this time the creature was ready. It moved aside faster than the bullet could travel, then backhanded the sheriff into the prep counter. The impact made a sickening crack, and Sheriff Morrison didn't get up. "Now then," the creature said, turning its attention to the rest of us. "Who'd like to go first?" Jenny stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "Me. Leave them alone." "Brave," the creature mused. "I do appreciate courage. It makes the blood taste better." It moved toward her, but I grabbed a knife from the prep counter and put myself between them. "Stay back." The creature laughed. "A kitchen knife? How quaint." "Maybe," I said, "but it's all I've got." "Actually," said a new voice from behind the creature, "you've got more than that." The thing spun around to see Sheriff Morrison rising from the floor, but something was wrong with him. His skin was pale, his eyes reflected the kitchen's fluorescent lights, and when he smiled, I could see fangs. "Sheriff," I whispered. "Not anymore," he replied, "but I retain his memories, his knowledge of this town, and I know something our friend here doesn't." The state trooper creature frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Cedar Falls has a secret," Sheriff Morrison said. his voice carrying that same formal tone as Ranger Holloway, something the founding families have kept hidden for over a century. He moved to a seemingly ordinary section of the kitchen wall and pressed against a specific tile. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a cache of weapons that definitely weren't standard police-issue crossbows with silver-tipped bolts, wooden stakes, vials of what looked like holy water. The Van Helsing Society, Sheriff Morrison explained, founded in 1870, 3 after the first vampire outbreak in these mountains. Every sheriff of Cedar Falls has been a member, trained to recognize and eliminate the undead. The state trooper creature hissed, backing away from the revealed weapons. Impossible! We would have sensed others like us. Oh, but I'm not like you, Sheriff Morrison said, selecting a crossbow. I was turned, yes, but not by your colony. I'm much older than you think. He aimed the crossbow at the state trooper. I've been hunting your kind for over a century, and I've been waiting for you to make a mistake like this. The silver bolt took the creature in the heart. It shrieked once, then crumbled to dust. Sheriff Morrison turned to us, and I saw something human flicker in his undead eyes. Get to the weapons cache in the basement of the police station. The combination is Pete's badge number 2719. You'll find everything you need to fight them. What about you? Jenny asked. I'll hold them off as long as I can, but you need to understand this infestation is bigger than just Cedar Falls. They've been spreading for months, infiltrating emergency services, government agencies. You're going to need help. Where do we go? I asked. Find Agent Reynolds at the FBI field office in Denver. Tell her the Van Helsing code phrase. The night is dark and full of terrors. She'll know what it means. The sounds of the creatures breaking through the front of the diner were getting louder. Sheriff Morrison handed me a set of keys. My patrol car's in the alley. Take it and get out of town. Don't stop. Don't look back. And whatever you do, don't trust anyone until you reach Agent Reynolds. How do we know she's not one of them? Jenny asked. Sheriff Morrison smiled, and for a moment he looked almost human again. Because she's my daughter, and the Van Helsing Society has been preparing for this day for over a century. Chapter 7. The Network. Sheriff Morrison's patrol car had been modified in ways that weren't immediately obvious. The windows were tinted with something that made the glass shimmer, and there were silver symbols etched into the dashboard. When I turned the key, the radio immediately crackled to life with voices speaking in code. All units, be advised, we have a Code Black situation in Cedar Falls. Repeat, Code Black. Code Black? Jenny asked as we raced through the empty streets toward the police station. Vampire outbreak, I guessed. Morrison wasn't the only one who knew about this. The police station was deserted, but the basement was exactly as Sheriff Morrison had described. Hidden behind a false wall was an arsenal that belonged in a museum of supernatural warfare crossbows, silver bullets, wooden stakes, vials of blessed water, even what looked like flamethrowers. How long has this been going on? Jenny whispered, staring at weapons that were clearly decades old. I found a leather journal among the supplies and flipped through it, page after page of meticulous records, dating back to the 1800s. Vampire sightings, attack patterns, kill confirmations. The Van Helsing Society had been fighting this war for over a century. Look at this, I said, pointing to a map covered in red pins. Outbreaks all across the western United States. Pine Ridge was just the latest. But it says here the outbreaks were contained, Jenny noted, reading over my shoulder. Small groups, isolated incidents. What's different about this one? I turned to the most recent entries and found the answer. Leadership. All the previous outbreaks were random individual vampires or small groups with no organization. But this Holloway creature, he's different. He's building something bigger. The radio in Sheriff Morrison's car crackled again. Unit 7 to base. We've lost contact with Cedar Falls, requesting immediate backup. Negative Unit 7. Maintain perimeter. No one goes in until the cleanup crew arrives. Jenny and I exchanged glances. Cleanup crew? I grabbed the radio microphone. This is Unit 12. What's the status on the cleanup crew? Unit 12. You're not on our roster. Identify yourself. Sheriff Morrison sent us. We're carrying intelligence on the outbreak. A long pause, then stand by. After several minutes, a different voice came on the radio. Unit 12. This is Agent Reynolds. Give me the code phrase. I remembered Sheriff Morrison's words. The night is dark and full of terrors. Copy that. What's your current position? Cedar Falls Police Station basement. We have the Van Helsing archives. Good. Get out of there now and head south on Highway 27. There's an abandoned gas station 15 miles out. Meet us there in 30 minutes. Us? You'll see. We loaded the patrol car with as many weapons as we could carry and headed for the highway. The roads were eerily empty, no traffic, no other police cars, nothing. It was as if the entire region had been evacuated. The abandoned gas station sat at a lonely crossroads, its windows boarded up and weeds growing through cracks in the pavement. But as we pulled into the parking lot, vehicles emerged from concealment: black SUVs, unmarked vans, even what looked like a mobile command center. A woman in tactical gear approached our car. She was in her 40s, with graying hair and hard eyes that had seen too much. I'm Agent Reynolds. You must be the survivors from Pine Ridge. How did you know about Pine Ridge? I asked. We've been tracking this outbreak for weeks. The Holloway entity has been more aggressive than anything we've seen before. He's not just creating random vampires, she's building an army. She led us to the command center, where dozens of monitors showed satellite feeds, thermal imaging, and communication intercepts. The scale of the operation was staggering. How many of you are there? Jenny asked. More than you'd think, fewer than we need. Agent Reynolds replied. The Van Helsing Society went underground in the 1950s when the government started taking an interest. We've been operating as a black project ever since. A government project to fight vampires? Officially, we don't exist. Unofficially, we're the reason vampire outbreaks don't make the evening news. She showed us a map displaying the current situation. Cedar Falls was marked with a pulsing red dot, surrounded by a growing circle of yellow indicators. The infection is spreading faster than we've ever seen, Agent Reynolds explained. Usually, new vampires are unstable, easy to track and eliminate. But Holloway's creations are different. They retain their intelligence, their memories, their ability to blend into society. How is that possible? We think he's not a typical vampire. Our research suggests he's something much older, possibly a progenitor strain that's been dormant for centuries. Agent Reynolds pulled up another screen showing intercepts from emergency service communications. They've infiltrated state police, CDC response teams, even some federal agencies. We estimate they've turned over 200 people in the last 48 hours. 200. I felt sick. That's impossible. The exponential growth pattern is accelerating. If we don't stop this in the next 24 hours, it'll spread beyond our ability to contain. How do you contain something like this? Jenny asked. Agent Reynolds was quiet for a moment, staring at the tactical displays. Extreme measures. Measures I hope we don't have to take. Before she could elaborate, alarms started blaring throughout the command center. One of the technicians called out, "We've got movement from Cedar Falls. Convoy of vehicles heading south on Highway 27. The main screen showed thermal imaging of a dozen vehicles racing down the dark highway. but the heat signatures of the occupants were all wrong, too cold, too uniform. "They found us," Agent Reynolds said. "How long until they reach our position?" 12 minutes at current speed. Evacuate the command center. Fall back to position Beta." As the team scrambled to pack up their equipment, Agent Reynolds turned to us. "You two have a choice. We can get you out of here, relocate you somewhere safe until this is over. Or you can stay and help us finish this." "Finish it how?" I asked. She handed me a tablet showing satellite images of Pine Ridge State Park. Tactical nuclear strike. It's the only way to be sure we get all of them. "You're going to nuke the forest?" "Unless we can think of something better in the next few hours." She looked at both of us intently. "You've been inside their operation. You've seen how they think, how they organize. If there's another way to stop them, we need to know now." I thought about everything we'd witnessed, the methodical way Holloway had turned our friends, the strategic infiltration of official agencies, the careful expansion of their territory. "They're not just spreading randomly," I said. "They have a plan. Holloway chose Pine Ridge for a reason, and Cedar Falls for a reason. There's a pattern." "What kind of pattern?" I pulled up the map of previous outbreaks on the tablet. "Look at the locations. They're all along specific geographical lines, mountain ranges, river valleys, natural corridors that connect remote areas to populated regions." Jenny leaned over my shoulder, studying the pattern. "They're building a network, not just a random infection, but a connected system of colonies." Agent Reynolds stared at the map, understanding dawning in her eyes. "A coordinated invasion. If each colony establishes itself and then spreads to the next logical location, they could control the entire western United States within a year." I finished. The convoy of vampire-controlled vehicles was getting closer, and we had minutes to decide our next move. But now I understood what we were really fighting, not just a local outbreak, but the beginning of a supernatural war for the continent. "There has to be a way to break the network," I said. "Some kind of central control, a way to disrupt their coordination." Agent Reynolds nodded grimly. "Then we better figure it out fast, because in 10 minutes, we're going to have company." Chapter 8: The Source. The convoy reached our position just as we finished evacuating the command center. From our new position on a ridge overlooking the abandoned gas station, we watched through night vision scopes as dozens of pale figures emerged from the vehicles. They moved with perfect coordination, spreading out to search the area with military precision. These weren't the random, hunger-driven creatures of vampire folklore. They were an organized force with a clear command structure. "Look at the way they're searching," Agent Reynolds whispered. "Grid pattern, overlapping coverage, efficient communication. Someone's trained them." "Holloway?" Jenny suggested. "Maybe. Or maybe Holloway's just a lieutenant." Agent Reynolds adjusted her scope. "I think we're dealing with something that's been planning this for a very long time." As we watched, one of the creatures found something at the gas station, probably traces of our presence. It raised its head and made a sound that was part howl, part signal. The others converged on its position instantly. "They're tracking us," I said. "How long before they pick up our trail?" "Not long, but I want to try something first." Agent Reynolds pulled out a specialized piece of equipment that looked like a cross between a radio and a medical scanner. "Biometric tracker," she explained. "It can detect vampiric signatures up to 5 miles away." She activated the device and immediately the screen lit up with dozens of red dots, too many to count, spread throughout the valley below us. "Jesus," Jenny breathed. "There are hundreds of them." "Look at the pattern," Agent Reynolds said, manipulating the display. "They're not randomly distributed. They're arranged in a specific formation." She was right. The red dots formed a rough circle around a central point about 3 miles to the north. and at that central point was a signature that was different from the others, larger, brighter, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. "That's it," I said. "That's their command center." "Or their creator," Agent Reynolds added. "If there's something controlling all of them, it's there." The tracking device started beeping rapidly. The vampire search party had found our trail and was heading up the ridge. "We need to move," Agent Reynolds said. "But first, I want you two to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this group." As we gathered our gear and prepared to retreat, she continued. "The Van Helsing Society has been studying vampire hierarchy for over a century. Most vampires are created randomly, without proper guidance. They're unstable, driven by hunger, easy to track and eliminate. But these are different," Jenny said. "Exactly. These were created by what we call a progenitoran ancient vampire with the knowledge and power to create stable offspring. Progenitors are incredibly rare. We've only documented 3 in recorded history. What happened to the other 2? We killed them, but it took decades of preparation and massive resources, and we never faced one that had managed to create this many offspring." The beeping from the tracker was getting faster. Our pursuers were closing in. "There's something else," Agent Reynolds said as we started moving. "Progenitors have a weakness. They maintain a psychic connection with all their offspring. It allows them to coordinate like we've seen, but it also means that if the progenitor is destroyed, all the vampires it created will die instantly." "All of them?" I asked. "Every single one. The connection works both ways. Destroy the source, and the entire network collapses." We moved through the forest as quietly as possible, but I could hear our pursuers behind us, getting closer. They didn't need flashlights or night vision. Their enhanced senses let them track us in complete darkness. "So we just need to kill this progenitor," Jenny said. "How hard can that be?" Agent Reynolds gave her a grim look. "Progenitors don't get to be ancient by being easy to kill. They're stronger, faster, and smarter than their offspring. Plus, they'll be surrounded by hundreds of loyal vampires willing to die to protect them." "What about the nuclear option?" "Still on the table, but if we can get close enough to take out the progenitor directly, we can save the surrounding area from radioactive contamination." A howl echoed through the forest behind us, much closer than before. They definitely found our trail. "How far to the command center?" I asked. Agent Reynolds checked her GPS. 2 miles northeast, but we'll have to get past their perimeter, and they'll know we're coming. "Unless we give them something else to focus on," I said, an idea forming. "What do you mean?" "The tracker shows hundreds of them, right? All focused on protecting their progenitor. But what if we could draw them away?" Agent Reynolds frowned. "Draw them away? How?" "By making them think their real target is somewhere else. What if we split up, create multiple trails, force them to divide their attention?" "That's suicide. None of us would survive alone against that many vampires." "Not alone," I said. "But what if we had backup?" I pulled out the radio from Sheriff Morrison's patrol car. "This is connected to the Van Helsing network, right? How many other teams are in the area?" Agent Reynolds checked her own radio. 3 other strike teams, about 30 operatives total, but they're all maintaining perimeter positions. "Call them in. Have them create diversions at multiple points around the valley. While the vampires are dealing with that, a small team can get through to the progenitor." "A small team," Jenny said slowly, "meaning us. It's the only way. We're the ones who've seen their operation up close, who understand how they think, and we're already here." Agent Reynolds was quiet for a moment, considering the plan. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit were getting louder, breaking branches, inhuman snarls, the pad of feet moving faster than any human could run. "It could work," she said finally. "But you need to understand what you're volunteering for. Progenitors are cunning. It won't just try to kill you, it'll try to turn you, to add you to its collection, and if it succeeds, we become part of the problem," I finished. "Exactly." Another howl, close enough that we could hear the creatures breathing between the trees. We were almost out of time. "Make the call," I said. "Set up the diversions. We'll handle the rest." Agent Reynolds keyed her radio and started giving orders to the other teams. Within minutes, explosions and gunfire erupted at 3 different points around the valley. The biometric tracker showed the vampire forces splitting up, rushing to respond to the threats. "It's working," Jenny said, watching the red dots scatter on the screen. But the central signature, the progenitor, remained exactly where it was, waiting. "It knows," Agent Reynolds said grimly. "It's not falling for the diversion. It knows we're coming for it." I checked the weapons we'd taken from the police station: silver bullets, blessed water, wooden stakes, everything the Van Helsing Society had developed over a century of vampire hunting. "Then let's not keep it waiting," I said. As we started moving toward the central signature, I tried not to think about the fact that we were walking into a trap. The progenitor had been planning this for decades, maybe centuries. It had turned hundreds of people into its servants, infiltrated government agencies, and built a network that could spread across the continent. What chance did 3 humans with antique weapons have against something like that? But as we crept through the dark forest toward the heart of the vampire colony, I realized I didn't care about the odds. Too many people had already died. Too many more would die if we didn't try. The red dot on the tracker pulsed like a heartbeat, drawing us deeper into the darkness. Chapter 9. The Progenitor. The Vampire Command Center was not what I expected. We found it in a natural clearing deep in the forest, surrounded by ancient pine trees that formed a perfect circle. At the center stood a single figure, tall, elegant, wearing clothes that looked like they belonged in another century, not Ranger Holloway, but something far older. The progenitor turned as we approached, and I saw a face that was both beautiful and terrible. Pale skin that seemed to glow in the moonlight, dark eyes that held the weight of centuries, features that might have been carved from marble. When it smiled, revealing fangs like polished ivory, the expression was almost kind. "Welcome," it said in a voice like velvet over steel. "I have been waiting for you." Around the clearing, dozens of vampires stood motionless in the shadows, our friends from the camping trip, residents of Cedar Falls, the fake emergency personnel we'd encountered, all of them watching with those same hungry, predatory eyes. "You're the one behind all this," Agent Reynolds said, raising her crossbow. "Behind it, my dear woman, I am it. Every vampire in this valley is an extension of my will, a facet of my being. When you destroy my children, you wound me. When you threaten my colony, you threaten me." It stepped closer, and I could see that despite its human appearance, there was something fundamentally wrong with its proportions. Too tall, limbs slightly too long, movements that flowed like liquid rather than walking. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. "Planning?" The progenitor laughed, a sound like silver bells. "Young man, I have been alive for over 800 years. This is not a planet, it is the inevitable result of human expansion into my territory." "Your territory?" "These mountains, these forests, this entire region, it has been mine since before your ancestors crossed the ocean. I slept beneath the earth for centuries, content to hunt the occasional traveler, the isolated homesteader. But then you built your roads, your parks, your towns. You brought me an endless supply of prey delivered directly to my doorstep. Agent Reynolds fired her crossbow, but the progenitor moved faster than the eye could follow. The silver bolt passed harmlessly through empty air, and suddenly the creature was standing directly behind her. Silver, it mused, examining the bolt. Holy water, blessed wood, all the old remedies. Your Van Helsing Society has learned much over the years. But you still don't understand what you're truly facing. With a casual gesture, it sent Agent Reynolds flying across the clearing. She hit a tree with a sickening crack and didn't get up. You see, the progenitor continued, turning its attention to Jenny and me. I am not some mindless monster driven by bloodlust. I am evolution itself, humanity's next step. Every person I turn becomes stronger, faster, more intelligent than they ever were as mere mortals. You're a parasite, Jenny said defiantly. You destroy people and wear their faces. Destroy? Look around you, child. See how perfect they are now. I looked at the vampires surrounding us and realized with horror that it was right. Marcus stood near the edge of the clearing, but his usual anxious expression had been replaced by serene confidence. Kate's face showed an intelligence and awareness that had never been there before. Even Dave, who'd always been somewhat clumsy and awkward, now moved with fluid grace. They're still our friends, Jenny whispered. No, the progenitor said gently. They are so much more than your friends ever were. They are perfected versions of themselves, freed from fear, doubt, mortality. They are what humanity could become if you would only embrace the gift I offer. It moved closer to us, and I raised the silver knife I'd taken from the diner's kitchen. The blade shook in my hand. You killed Pete Morrison, I said. The real Ranger. Poor Pete. He resisted the transformation, fought against the inevitable change. His mind broke rather than adapt. I had to put him out of his misery. The progenitor's expression showed what might have been genuine sadness. Not everyone is strong enough to evolve. And Ranger Holloway? A fiction. A role I created to interact with your bureaucratic systems. Amazing how readily humans accept authority figures without questioning their credentials. Agent Reynolds stirred behind the tree where she'd landed, but she was clearly hurt. Blood ran down her face, and one arm hung at an unnatural angle. The nuclear strike, she called out weakly. If we don't report in, we'll never come, the progenitor finished. Do you think I haven't infiltrated your communications? Your backup teams are already being converted as we speak. By tomorrow night, the entire Van Helsing operation in this region will be working for me. That's impossible, I said. Is it? How do you think I've remained hidden for 8 centuries? I don't just create vampires, I create sleeper agents. Deep cover operatives who retain their human appearance and loyalties for years or even decades. Some of your most trusted allies have been mine all along. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If the Van Helsing Society had been compromised, if there were vampire agents in the government, in the military, this is bigger than just one colony, I realized. Much bigger. Cedar Falls is merely the beginning. Within a year, I will have established colonies throughout the western states. Within a decade, across the continent. Your species will not be destroyed, it will be improved, elevated, perfected. Jenny stepped closer to me, and I could feel her trembling. We were surrounded by dozens of vampires, facing a creature that had been planning this for centuries, with no backup coming and our leader injured. What do you want from us? She asked. The progenitor smiled, and this time the expression was genuinely warm. I want to offer you the same gift I've given your friends. Look at them truly, look. See how peaceful they are, how content. They have no fear of death, no anxiety about the future, no doubt about their purpose. I looked at Marcus again, and it was true. The constant worry that had always creased his features was gone, replaced by calm certainty. He met my eyes and nodded slightly, as if encouraging me to accept what was being offered. The transformation is painless, the progenitor continued. A brief moment of change, and then eternal life, eternal purpose. You could be together forever, all of you, as part of something greater than yourselves. And if we refuse, I asked, then you will die, and I will take what I need from your corpses. The outcome is the same, but the experience is vastly different. Behind us, Agent Reynolds was trying to pull herself upright, reaching for something in her tactical vest, but the progenitor noticed her movement. Agent Reynolds, it said without turning around, please don't make this more difficult than necessary. The vampires around the clearing began to move closer, forming a tighter circle around us. Their faces showed no malice, no hunger, just patient inevitability. Choose quickly, the progenitor said. My children grow restless, and I would prefer to add you to our family willingly rather than by force. I gripped the silver knife tighter, knowing it was useless against something this powerful, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was that we were still human, still capable of making our own choices. Go to hell, I said. The progenitor sighed. How disappointing. I had hoped you would be more evolved than your predecessors. It gestured to its vampire children, and they began to close in. Chapter 10. Blood and Silver. Agent Reynolds' grenade detonated at the exact moment the vampires reached us. The explosion of blessed silver fragments sent the creatures shrieking backward, their perfect flesh burning and smoking where the sanctified metal touched them. In the chaos, I grabbed Jenny and dove toward the edge of the clearing. This way, Agent Reynolds shouted, hauling herself upright with obvious pain. She had a second grenade in her good hand, using it to keep the vampires at bay. The progenitor stood in the center of the destruction, untouched by the silver fragments that had devastated its children. Its beautiful face showed mild annoyance, like a parent dealing with unruly children. Clever, it admitted, but ultimately pointless. The wounded vampires were already beginning to heal, their burns fading as we watched. Only the ones hit directly by multiple fragments stayed down, and even they weren't dead, just temporarily incapacitated. How many grenades do you have? I asked as we reached the tree line. That was the last one, Agent Reynolds replied grimly. The progenitor raised its hand, and its vampire children immediately stopped pursuing us. They formed a new circle around their creator, moving with that same perfect coordination. You cannot run from me, the progenitor called out. This entire forest is my domain. Every tree, every shadow, every path, I know them all. There is nowhere you can go that I cannot follow. It was true. We were 3 injured humans in the middle of vast wilderness, facing a creature that had lived here for 8 centuries. But as I looked around the dark forest, I remembered something from the Van Helsing archives. The symbols, I whispered to Agent Reynolds, in Sheriff Morrison's car on the dashboard. What were they? Protective wards, she replied. Standard Van Helsing equipment. Why? Are there others, hidden in the forest, maybe? The old-timers used to place them at strategic points, but that was decades ago. Most of them would have weathered away by now. But not all of them? Agent Reynolds paused, thinking. There might be some at the original settlement, the first Van Helsing outpost in this region, established in the 1870s. It's about a mile north of here, but it's been abandoned for 50 years. Can we make it there? If we're very lucky and very fast. Behind us, the progenitor was giving orders to its children in a language that sounded older than civilization. The vampires began to spread out, moving to surround our position. They're hurting us, Jenny observed. Let them, I said, as long as they're herding us toward the old settlement. We ran through the forest as quietly as possible, using the silver knife to cut through underbrush when necessary. Behind us, I could hear the vampires moving through the trees, not hurrying, not worried about losing us. They knew these woods better than we did. The old Van Helsing settlement was a collection of ruins barely visible among the overgrown vegetation. Stone foundations marked where buildings once stood, and a few wooden structures had somehow survived the decades. But most importantly, carved into trees and rocks throughout the area were symbols, protective wards that still hummed with power even after all these years. "I can feel it," Jenny said as we entered the settlement. "The air's different here." The vampires pursuing us stopped at the edge of the ruins, unwilling or unable to enter the protected area, but the progenitor had no such limitations. It walked calmly through the wards, barely acknowledging their presence. "Impressive," it said, examining the carved symbols. "Your predecessors were more thorough than I gave them credit for. But these old protections are weak, faded. They cannot hold me for long." Agent Reynolds found what she was looking for in the ruins of the main buildinga, hidden cache of weapons and supplies, protected by the same wards that kept the vampires at bay. "Final stand?" she asked, pulling out silver bullets and blessed water. "Looks like it," I replied. The progenitor circled the ruins like a patient predator, testing the strength of the protective barriers. Each time it touched one of the ward symbols, there was a flash of light and the smell of burning flesh. But each flash was weaker than the last. "Tell me," it said conversationally, "what is it you hope to accomplish? Even if you kill me, which you cannot, my children, we'll simply create a new progenitor. The process is irreversible." "That's not how it works," Agent Reynolds said, loading silver bullets into her pistol. "We've studied your kind. When a progenitor dies, all its offspring die with it." "Ah," the progenitor smiled. "But that assumes I am the original progenitor. What if I told you I was created by something even older, something that has been sleeping beneath these mountains for millennia?" The possibility hit me like ice water. If this creature was just another vampire, if there was something even more powerful controlling it. "You're lying," Jenny said. "Am I? Why do you think I chose this particular forest? These specific mountains? Do you think it was random chance that led me here?" The progenitor gestured toward the ground beneath our feet. "Something ancient sleeps below. Something that makes my 800 years seem like a brief moment. I am merely its herald, preparing the way for its awakening." Agent Reynolds fired 3 silver bullets in rapid succession. The progenitor dodged 2, but the third caught it in the shoulder, spinning it around with a shriek of pain and rage. "Enough talk," she said grimly. The creature's wound was already healing, but more slowly than its children's injuries had. The silver was having some effect, even if it wasn't enough to kill. "You want to know the truth?" the progenitor snarled, its perfect composure finally cracking. "Fine, I'll show you." It pressed its hand against one of the ward symbols, ignoring the burning pain. Dark energy flowed from its fingers into the protective barrier, corrupting it, turning it against us. The symbol's light flickered and died. "No," Agent Reynolds whispered. "That's impossible." One by one, the protective wards around the settlement began to fail. The vampires at the perimeter pressed closer, sensing their opportunity. "The old magic is weak," the progenitor said, moving to the next symbol. "But my master's power is eternal." "We need to get out of here," I said, but there was nowhere to go. The vampires had us completely surrounded now, and without the ward's protection, we were helpless. "Wait," Jenny said suddenly. "Look at the pattern." She was right. As the progenitor corrupted each ward symbol, I could see that they weren't just random protective barriers. They formed a specific pattern across the settlementa containment circle. They weren't meant to keep vampires out, I realized. They were meant to keep something in. The progenitor froze, understanding dawning in its ancient eyes. You don't know what you're suggesting. The Van Helsing Society didn't just fight vampires, Agent Reynolds said, pieces clicking into place. They were guardians, protectors of something that had to stay buried. Stop, the progenitor commanded, but its voice carried desperation now instead of confidence. I ran to the next ward symbol, driving my silver knife into the carved stone. The blade shattered, but not before completing the circuit. Energy flowed through the ground, connecting all the remaining symbols in a web of ancient power. The earth beneath our feet began to tremble. You fools, the progenitor screamed. You have no idea what you're awakening. The vampires around the perimeter began to retreat, their perfect coordination breaking down as primal fear overcame their loyalty. Even they could sense that something was rising from the depths below. What is it? Jenny asked, grabbing my arm as the trembling intensified. Before anyone could answer, the ground split open. What emerged was not another vampire, not another predator. It was something far older and infinitely more alien. A mass of writhing shadows and gleaming eyes, a presence that hurt to look at directly. It rose from the earth like smoke, but smoke that could think and hunger and hate. The progenitor fell to its knees. Master, it whispered, I was preparing the way, gathering servants for your awakening. These humans interrupted. The shadow thing considered its servant with contempt that needed no words. Then, with casual cruelty, it reached out and drained the progenitor's life force in seconds. The 800-year-old vampire crumbled to dust, just another failed experiment. All around the forest, the vampires that had been the progenitor's children began to scream. Without their creator to sustain them, they were dying but not peacefully. They burned from the inside out, their stolen life force returning to the entity that had ultimately created it all. Well, Agent Reynolds said, reloading her weapon with shaking hands, this is new. The ancient thing turned its attention to us, and I felt my sanity straining under its regard. This was what the Van Helsing Society had really been guarding against, not just vampires, but something that existed before human civilization, before human understanding. But as it studied us, something unexpected happened. The creature paused, tilted what might have been its head, and then began to sink back into the earth. It's leaving, Jenny whispered. Not leaving, Agent Reynolds corrected. Going back to sleep. We're not significant enough to bother with. The ground sealed itself over the ancient presence, leaving only disturbed earth to mark where it had emerged. The forest fell silent, truly silent, for the first time since we'd arrived at Pine Ridge. Is it over? I asked. Agent Reynolds was checking her biometric scanner. The screen was blank, no vampire signatures anywhere in the valley. For now, she said, but something like that doesn't stay dormant forever. The Van Helsing Society will need to rebuild the containment protocols, strengthen the wards. And if it wakes up again, then we hope someone smarter than us figures out how to deal with it. We made our way back through the forest toward Cedar Falls, but the town was a ghost settlement now. The people who'd been turned into vampires were simply gone. Their bodies crumbled to dust when their progenitor died. The few genuine humans who'd survived were being evacuated by hazmat teams. What's the official story? I asked Agent Reynolds as we reached the edge of town. Gas leak. Toxic exposure caused hallucinations and mass evacuation. The area will be sealed off for environmental cleanup. And us? You've been through a traumatic experience. Memory can be unreliable after severe stress. You might remember camping trip that went wrong, friends who got lost in the woods, tragic accident. You're going to make us forget. I'm going to offer you a choice. You can remember everything and spend the rest of your lives knowing what's really out there in the dark. Or you can accept some edited memories and go back to your normal lives. Jenny and I looked at each other. After everything we'd been through, could we really go back to pretending the world was safe and ordinary? "What about you?" Jenny asked Agent Reynolds. "Don't you want to forget?" "Someone has to remember. Someone has to stand guard." We drove away from Cedar Falls in government vehicles, leaving behind the ruins of what had been our spring break adventure. The mountains receded behind us, looking peaceful and ordinary in the morning light. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us leave. 3 months later, I was back in college, finishing my senior year. The official records showed that our camping trip had been cut short by a gas leak at Pine Ridge State Park. Dave, Marcus, Sarah, Kate, Tom, and Lisa were listed as missing, presumed dead in a hiking accident. Their families held memorial services. We attended, Jenny and I, sharing edited memories of friends lost in a tragic accident. It was easier that way, more comfortable for everyone involved. But sometimes, late at night, I remembered the truth. I remembered the hunger in their eyes when they'd been turned, the perfect coordination of the vampire colony, the ancient thing that slept beneath the mountains. And I wondered if Agent Reynolds was right, if forgetting was really the merciful option. Jenny seemed to be handling it better than me. She'd accepted the memory modification, choosing to remember only a camping trip gone wrong. She was getting therapy for the trauma, talking about survivor's guilt and moving forward with her life. I envied her sometimes. The edited memories looked so much cleaner, so much easier to live with. But then I'd catch her looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, and I'd wonder if she really had forgotten everything. There were moments, just brief flashes, when something flickered behind her eyes, something that looked almost like hunger. It happened more frequently as the weeks passed. A sideways glance when she thought I wasn't looking, a smile that was just a little too sharp, the way she'd grown pale, avoiding direct sunlight whenever possible. I told myself I was being paranoid, seeing threats where none existed. The vampire colony was destroyed. The progenitor was dead. Everyone who'd been turned had crumbled to dust when their creator died. Everyone except... "How are you feeling?" I asked her one evening as we studied together in the library. "Fine," she said, not looking up from her textbook. "Why do you ask?" "You look pale lately. Have you been sleeping okay?" She finally met my eyes, and for just a moment, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Her pupils reflected the fluorescent light like mirrors, and when she smiled, I could swear her canine teeth looked sharper than before. "I've been sleeping wonderfully," she said. "Better than I have in years, actually. Such vivid dreams." "What kind of dreams?" "Oh, you know, the usual college stress dreams. Being late for class, forgetting to study for exams." Her smile widened. "Running through dark forests, the taste of copper pennies, the sound of screaming." I stared at her, my heart hammering. "Jenny." "What's wrong?" she asked, tilting her head with predatory curiosity. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "The memory modification," I whispered. "It didn't work on you, did it?" "Memory modification?" She laughed, and the sound was like silver bells, exactly like the progenitor's laugh. "Oh, sweetie, there was no memory modification." "That's impossible," Agent Reynolds said. Agent Reynolds said a lot of things, most of them true, some of them creative interpretations of the facts. Jenny closed her textbook and leaned closer. "Did you really think that ancient thing under the mountain was sleeping alone all those centuries?" The library suddenly felt very cold. Other students were scattered at tables around us, but they seemed distant, unreal, like figures in a dream. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that some of us were special long before we ever went camping at Pine Ridge. Some of us have been waiting, preparing, serving something much older than any progenitor. She reached across the table and touched my hand. Her skin was ice cold. The Van Helsing Society wasn't the only organization with deep cover agents. She continued, the ancient powers have been placing their servants in strategic positions for centuries. Students, teachers, government officials, even vampire hunters themselves. You're one of them. You always were. Since I was 12 years old. A family tradition, you might say. We've been the eyes and ears of the sleeping god for generations. I tried to pull my hand away, but her grip was like iron. Don't worry, she said gently. Your part in this is almost over. You were the perfect witness, believable, traumatized, desperate to be believed. When you report that the survivor of Pine Ridge has been turned, that the infection is spreading even after the containment protocol succeeded, the Van Helsing Society will mobilize everything they have. And then they'll walk right into the trap we've been preparing for over a century. Around us, the other students in the library began to look up from their books. One by one, they turned to stare at us with eyes that reflected the light like mirrors. How many of you are there? I asked. More than you can imagine. We're in every major university, every government agency, every organization that might pose a threat to our master's plans. When it wakes again, and it will wake again, it won't face scattered resistance. It will face a world already prepared for its rule. Jenny's smile was beautiful and terrible, full of sharp white teeth that caught the library's fluorescent lighting. Thank you for your service, she said sweetly, but the Ranger already took our blood, all of us, a long, long time ago. The fluorescent lights flickered and went out. In the darkness, all I could see were dozens of pairs of eyes, glowing like stars, watching me with patient hunger. And somewhere far beneath the earth, something ancient stirred in its sleep and smiled.